So, how long have you been a member of 282? 10 years? Okay. And I know that you worked on the space program, but I don't know very many details, and that's what you're going to tell us about tonight. And I know that he's got a great subject to talk about, and I'm really looking forward to hearing about it. And so I'm going to ask you to use the mic, because I think we've got a big group tonight, and I think that'd be a nice way to go. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Hugo.
Glad to see so many people here. David assured me it was just going to be a small family group, and I can't believe everybody's here to listen to me. It must have been a wonderful corned beef, must have been a beautiful corned beef and cabbage dinner we had this morning.
That's right.
Thank you for coming. I'm going to ask Anita to butt in whenever she can, because she has a much better memory about events than I do.
A different approach.
Yeah. Well, the title of tonight's talk is Turds in Space. How we solve one of the shittiest problems in manned spaceflight. So, let me start off by telling you how I got involved in this. Back in the 1960s, I was a young assistant professor of microbiology at Long Island University. I was also a research fellow at the American Museum of Natural History in New York, studying marine plankton, which meant that we were growing microscopic algae and other microscopic marine organisms. Now, that's my part of my side of things. How many people here are familiar with Republic Aviation? What's Republic famous for?
P-47.
P-47.
Yeah. Republic, or Fairchild Republic as it's called now, is definitely an airplane company. But in Republic there were a whole bunch of individual little groups that did other things. Like there was a safety car, bunch of people working on a safety car. And there was also a life science group that worked as a contractor. Now, NASA was formed in 1958, but in 59, 60, 61, 62, manned space was still pretty much an Air Force program. And the Air Force had a contract with Republic, with the Life Science Group of Republic, on investigating growing algae in space. The idea is this: the astronaut would pee in a pot, you grow algae on that, the algae would make oxygen, and you could eat the algae for food. Sounds great, doesn't it? Yeah.
They're still trying to do it, by the way.
They're still trying to do it. There's only one vehicle on which that system really works. Does anybody know what it is? The Starship Enterprise. Believe me, if we're ever going to get a long duration flight to the Mars or someplace beyond, it's going to take a closed biological regenerative system to do it, where we can't carry everything with us. One of the other programs that they were doing, this was at Wright-Patterson, and one of the other programs we were doing was trying to make drinking water out of urine. And it works. There's many in the Aerospace Medical Association meeting I've been to where I've drugged a swigged glass of reclaimed urine. Nita has too. The only trouble with that program was it took 2 pounds of fuel to make 1 pound of water. You might as well wind up and carry the water to begin with. That's going to be another problem in space. The ability to regenerate stuff, and I'll talk more about that later. Well, what I got involved in, well anyway, back in, I'm not contagious.
He's not. He's all rearranged.
I'm a survivor from esophageal cancer, and I don't have an esophagus with valves any longer, so sometimes after eating it regurgitates up and then I cough a little bit. Anyway, Republic had this contract for growing algae in space, and I don't know how they got the contract, but they didn't have the slightest idea of what they were doing. So they heard about they heard about me at the Museum of Natural History, and they came to me for something. I finished the project for them, and it was very simple, solved the immediate problem. And they said to me, how would you like to come on board as director of our life science program? Well, that was very interesting because although I'd become quite established as a marine biologist, my first love had always been aviation. And the ability to go work for an aviation company was more than I could pass over. So I named them a figure that was totally ridiculous, and they said, can you start Monday?
Really?
And so I came on board. I said, can I keep my professor job too? And they said, no problem, go ahead. It's okay with us. So at nighttime I was largely a professor, and daytime I worked at Republic. Now, at Wright-Patterson we had a program, and the idea was if you locked men up in a closed space and cabin environment, would they ultimately get covered with green pus? We had no idea what close confinement would do to, we also didn't know what the space diet, as we knew it back then, would do. So we had to involve fecal feces. So we had 4 volunteers locked up in a tight chamber, about 10 feet by 10 feet, with my microbiologist, and monitoring their skin bacteria and their fecal bacteria. Am I doing something wrong?
No, I'm reading you otherwise.
Oh.
Well, it's a privilege to all of our speakers.
Yeah, anyway.
Well, you've got to have a beer.
My assistant Pete Kowalski would have a third bottle of martinis with me, and I always gave a very good presentation after a drink or two. Thank you very much, Henny.
Chris, what are you trying to do? Poison him?
He just got done telling you where's yours.
So anyway, we had these volunteers locked up in this chamber, and every few hours my technicians would go and the guys would pass out their feces and monitor their skin back. One thing we learned from that study was too much cleanliness is not a good thing. That you leave the body alone and it develops a skin flora that stabilizes itself, and a minimum of cleaning, and that's what ultimately became the space program, wet wipes and so on.
Can I just add something there?
Yeah, go ahead.
The first couple of people he put in that chamber, the minute they got their first paycheck, they up and left. So, because he was feeding them through a little hole, you know, it was sort of like a movie with Alcatraz or something. And so finally then he got some of his graduate students, and this was supposed to be their thesis. And he said if they walked out, they weren't going to get their masters, and they were going to flunk. So that's how he kept the people.
But graduate students are the lowest form of animal life. And so another study we did at Wright-Patterson was calcium loss. Now, we didn't have men in 0G really for any duration, so the closest thing to lack of muscle, the closest thing to weightlessness is having a guy lie quiet in bed for a long period of time. So we had people lying in bed, we were monitoring their urine, and we knew their calcium intake, and trying to get a feel for the calcium excretion from the urine. It wasn't a very good experiment, but we did that for a few years too.
And they're still trying to do that now. And that's why they have to exercise, because of what he found out with those studies. That's why when you see them filming in the spacecraft, they're always exercising. It's from those studies.
So as Nita said, calcium balance is still a problem, because we know the astronauts do lose calcium in space. The problem was, and we're now getting into about the beginning of the 1970s. The problem was that we didn't know anything about the calcium loss in the body in zero gravity. So the idea came up from NASA for a waste collection system that would work in zero gravity. Now, what is the first spaceship that the Americans had, and what was our first spaceship, the first space station?
Skylab.
Skylab, right? Good for you. How many people here remember Skylab? Very good. So there was a competition among Ham Standard and Republic and so forth to design a system that would collect waste, urine, feces, and vomit in space, and bring samples home from Skylab for analysis. So I work with our engineers and our designers, and I remember giving my presentation in Houston to NASA, and they said, Dr. Freudenthal, can you be assured that your system will give us the data that we need? And I said, absolutely. And I won a $20 million contract for the Skylab toilet system. And the Skylab toilet is fundamentally a medical experiment. You know, if you look up the Skylab toilet on Wikipedia, it doesn't mention anything about the toilet at all. But there was one of the few things on Skylab that worked perfectly. Now, I tried to bring you a picture of the toilet system, but I couldn't find one on the web to bring you to. But you can see the toilet if you go to the Kennedy Space, the Space Center, or the Smithsonian Institute. It sits there on the wall, and what it is basically is a soft seat, kind of like a saddle, lined with holes around the outside, air jets. And then we use vectored air coming in from the sides of the toilet seat to bring the feces and down into a collection device. Now, we collected the urine through a kind of a funnel. By the way, just to digress from them, does anybody here know how the astronauts collected feces on Mercury and on the? It was kind of like a plastic bag with finger cuts going into the bag. And the guy would. Excuse me a minute. The bag had an adhesive lip to it. The guy would glue this thing on his backside, and with his sticking his fingers into the bag, would pull the turd down into the bag. And then he would seal the bag up, drop in a pill of 8-hydroxyquinone antiseptic, and then you need a margarine bag, mix the antiseptic with the turd, and then put it away from storage. Urine prior to the toilet was dumped overboard. And when you dump something in space, there's no velocity to make it go away. The early spaceships were surrounded by a cloud of urine vapor around the outside of the spaceship.
Really?
Yeah. So anyway, what we did for urine, now, again, I'm sorry I don't have a picture of the toilet, but you peed into a kind of a funnel, and that went into a Teflon bag about the size of a pint milk container, about the square little container, and we had to weigh it Now, how would you weigh something in space? Anybody got any ideas?
My
Okay,
body.
let's put the microphone down here. Because there is no weight in zero gravity,
By volume?
we had a pendulum, a table that slid back and forth. And the period of oscillation is a function of the mass of the thing that you're in the container. So we put our engineers designed this pendulum device. We put the container on there, it would shake back and forth, we'd get the weight, and then we devised a sample that in 0 degree would take a measured sample of that, put it in a storage container, and that would be brought back to Earth in the command module and analyzed for calcium. The feces went in, now, from this, the guy sitting on this soft rubber thing with the air jet in there, and that directed the feces down into kind of a sandwich, a Ziploc bag with micropore so water vapor could pass through, but the turd couldn't. And that was put into like a toaster oven with a fire on the wall and mild heat applied, and that drove the water off. So we got dried feces, and so when the command module came back to Earth, it was literally a flying tanker of shit and urine. Now, also for vomit, the toilet had a vacuum tube, a vacuum cleaner tube, and the guy threw up with, how many people has anybody else besides me ever flown in zero gravity? I'm the only one here. Flown in zero gravity.
So you flew the vomit comet.
Flew the
Yeah,
vomit
here it's
comet.
coming
Here,
around.
Where's the picture?
That's him in the
There's a
middle.
picture of me floating around there. Now remember, to get this airflow, we needed a blower, a suction device. You guys who engineered picture trying to make a turbine blower that uses practically no electricity, has to withstand the vibration and the forces of liftoff, and we did it. I really owe a lot of credit to the engineers and the designers of Republic Aviation who built the system and got to work. So, because of the Skylab toilet, we understood now something about calcium balance and calcium loss, and it went a long way towards making manned space silently. By the way, when you see the early pictures of Mercury and Gemini and so forth, it's kind of cloudy in the cabin. Those are drops of urine floating around. There isn't any gravity, and if you pee and it misses the target, it goes into space. So one of the recreations of these early spacecraft was to sit there with a napkin and pick off little droplets of urine from the space cabin environment. Those cabins smelled, they stank. So we had this contract. I developed some aerosol cans of detergent that because you can't use water, you can't use the sink in the spacecraft is a little thing like a fish bowl that you kind of put your hand into, and a couple of drops of water come up, and you can't let the water float around free. So we packaged everything in a spray can like a hairspray, and we got a little bit of foam. So we did this study on the use of the foam in zero gravity. We got an Air Force nurse who showed up for work in a pair of flight boots and a blue bikini bathing suit, and we had a lot of fun squirting in zero gravity the stuff out of the can like one of these Halloween
String.
foam things going out of strings. I have movies someplace of the spray can shooting out in zero gravity It was a lot of
Said it
fun.
was the first X-rated film in zero gravity. He came home and tried to fly. The kids were laughing. He came home. He loved being up in that
We
machine.
also,
He'd come home and try flying through the hallways and through the house.
we also worked on feeding systems, and then I guess that's pretty much
No.
what. Leave that. Come over here.
He left out about the cleansers. They were very particular. They didn't want to smell like hospital. They didn't want to smell too masculine. And they didn't want to smell musky. And they didn't want to smell perfume or feminine. So who was he going to test all of this out on? Home. So the cleansers. And also, there had to be different cleansers for cleaning the kitchen area, and different cleansers for back here, and different cleansers for here, and different cleansers for here. So he would come home with all the different cleansers, and we'd have to test the bubbling out, and was it sticky afterwards, and all of those things. And all the food we had to taste after, that he would bring home to check all of that out. So the kids and the family, we all lived through all of this, which was absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, we got to know several of the astronauts. One, we flew a Cherokee, we had a Cherokee 6 at the time. We flew that with the family down to Houston. And
That was to see the space rocks,
Yeah.
because there wouldn't have been any rocks if he hadn't helped to get them there.
who we have dinner with? I forget, one of the astronauts.
One of the astronauts
Yeah,
in Houston, and what was the name of the place?
The San Jacinto Inn. Anybody ever been there?
And, yeah.
Good. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I guess that's pretty much.
No.
What? That's what she did.
No. Then one day, I got a call at the lab, and it was like, "You want me to do what?" And everybody in the lab stopped, and they said, "What does he want you to do now?" Because we kept getting these calls. Well, you know, there were no ladies up there for a while. Why? Tell me why.
Because the
There was
urine.
no place to pee or poop. So he had to put together the ladies' toilet. And he wondered, could I please be the specimen that could they try it out on? Well, I had seen the final product of the book, the report on the men's toilet, which was about so big, with lots of diagrams and photographs. And there were trajectories, and there were pivoting, all sorts of things. I knew about the jets. And I said, "Hugo, I too have 2 jobs."
We got
And
the Air Force nurse.
So he went to the hospital and got the urology nurses, and they could pee on command. Also, previously, if we go back a couple of years, when they were working with the food and the vomit, he had all the Republic secretaries. Yeah, you had all the Republic secretaries at lunch. They would eat lunch, they were given a bag, please throw up when you threw, and here's $10. So that year, when he flew us on, we were coming down here to see my parents.
But you gotta be doing
When we were seeing the space rocks, that happened to be a really bumpy ride from where, Montgomery, where we peed the kids, and then we got to Houston. And so, in all the 50-plus years he's flown, nobody ever, other than poor Richard, who was now 7, had to throw up. But we landed, and we just got out of the plane, and he knew never throw up in the plane. So he reached inside, got the barf bag, threw up, and I took it, I was throwing it in the garbage. "No, Mom, give it to Daddy, I need my $10.
Hey, you need this for the space program. I've met some wonderful people working in this program.
Watch it.
I got to know, don't kill yourself. I got to know Bernard von Braun personally. He and I had lunch many times together. He's a wonderful man, von Braun. I don't know what your feelings about him are, but he's an amazing individual. When Anita said, when he looked at you with those big blue eyes and shook your hand, you were the most important thing with him at the time. Amazing guy. One little story, just a closing.
No, we're not closing.
Towards, after we had been on the moon,
There's so much
I
more.
was having lunch with von Braun. And I said to him, Bernard, what did we really accomplish in this program? He thought for a moment and he said, Hugo, one of the most important things we did was we taught industry the concept of reliability. You take a TV set, a color TV for example, out of the box, take it out of the box and it works. And it goes on working. We taught industry the concept of reliability. Thank you very much.